when we meet physically, we would normally explain that where the fire exits are and that there is no planned fire test. So what I would say to all of you is if you do hear a fire alarm, you better check whether it's your own. And if so, please make a safe exit. There's a phenomenon called Zoom bombing, I'm told, which is when intruders come in and disrupt. We have tried their level best to ensure that those who are present are members justified in being here, and but we always concede the risk that something else will happen and somebody will try to disrupt the meeting. We very much hope not. And I think that is probably enough of a preamble. As far as the meeting itself is concerned, we would start by adopting the minutes of the annual general meeting. Terry, do you have the means to allow members to record a vote, or would oh, there we go.
We do, and it's a relatively straightforward kind of box where you just need to click on answering the question, do you support the adoption of the minutes of the 144th annual general meeting, which had been previously circulated? Yes or no, and if you could do, we'll give that a kind of a minute as people click away. Gosh, we're doing very well. So far, and I'll give it another few bits for those who've kind of voted. I think what I'll do is I'll just end the kind of polling now. Thank you very much kind of for that. And if I share the results, which hopefully you can see, I think we can take that as the minutes are approved.
Well, thank you all. Yeah, congratulate you all on your success with the technology. There were no matters arising from the minutes that I could detect that would not come up naturally. So what we'll do now is move on, therefore, to the report from the chairman, Professor Emeritus Cliff Haig. Cliff.
Thank you very much, Sandy. I just check that you can hear, yeah? It's okay.
I can hear you. At the moment, I can't see you, but no doubt that will change.
I've started my video.
There we are.
Are we okay?
That's
okay, yeah. Right, thank you. Well, thanks very much, Sandy, for starting us off. And thank you, everybody, for taking part in this. Hopefully, you've all received the written version of the report as part of the annual report. So you're pleased to know that I don't intend to go through it line by any means. It is, of course, a report on the year that actually ended last September, because our financial year runs from October the 1st through to September 30th. So this AGM is really focused on what was happening ending 8 or 9 months ago. Having said that, quite a few of the things that are in that report are still ongoing in or have carried on in some ways. In particular, I mentioned there the planning appeal at the Old Royal High School. As I'm sure all of you know, we are still awaiting the final decision on that, which now sits with the ministers. And we literally don't know when a decision will come through. But that was clearly a very big issue for us in 2018-19, and we just have to see now what the outcome is, and we'll clearly keep a watch on that. Also, in that report, I did mention the run into the Christmas market, and of course that has still been a significant issue. And again, at the moment, we're expecting that a planning application will be submitted any time now for retrospective permission for 2019 and for the next couple of years. And again, as you'll know from the newsletter, we're onto that one and will be active once the application comes in. Also in the report, I mentioned Our Unique City. And again, we've been carrying that forward. And later on in the program, after the formal end of the AGM, we will have a PowerPoint with commentary that's telling you just where we've taken that to. I've mentioned changes of staff. I'd just like to record my thanks again to Joe Taylor, who left us in the summer of last year. And I also mentioned that we've undertaken a couple of away days, which I think were very fruitful in that they focused us as a group of trustees and staff. And following that, we made some, I think, quite significant changes in the structure of the office, the responsibilities, the staffing, and in particular to focus on outreach and fundraising, rejig the roles of other staff a little, and we're able to recruit DJ, who you've seen already on this Zoom, as the fundraising and outreach officer, and already I think it's having a significant impact. So I'm really pleased that we've now got a very strong team with Terry and with James, and not least with Lucy, who's been invaluable to us as a temporary stand-in that's become happily a little bit more permanent, or at least over a few months it's become permanent with us. So we're going in the right direction there, I think. Membership, one of the things DJ has been doing since he's been in post is sifting through membership. The membership records had got outdated, and sadly, of course, it means that we've found that we've lost the number of members who've deceased. But we are now on top of it, and very encouragingly, there's quite a strong trajectory over the last 6-8 months of new people joining, and this can only be good news. Finally, I mentioned that we were trying to cope with the virus. That was written several weeks ago now. We are basically trying to move more things online. We don't really have much of a choice in it. It's been frustrating because other things that we were planning have had to be sidelined for now. But I do think I can report to you all as members that the organisation is in good shape, that we've got a very dedicated and talented staff, that your trustees have worked hard and well, I think, as a team. I'd like to just pay personal thanks to Ian McPhail and John McKinney, who've decided to step down, having served 3 years and having been recruited initially when we were rather short of trustees, actually back in 2016. And just thanks to all the trustees who've been terrific support, and to the staff and to the members, and to Sir Sandy for his continuing support in his role as president. Thank you.
Thank you, Cliff. And I'm sure we want all to record our thanks to you for your massive contribution to the Cockburn and your continued dedication. Cliff mentioned 2 resignations. Can I add my thanks to Ian McPhail and John McKinney? Can I mention, as I mentioned already, there will be no elections this year, but I'll be doing quorum, and in relation to council, we have 1 co-opted member, Mariana Trusson, who will continue under the terms of her appointment of her co-option, and Richard Scowthorne continues as a member, even though he has come to the end of his 2nd term. So council for the moment remains quorum. If that position looked threatened, then I think, Terry, we may have to organise some sort of interim general meeting if that proves necessary. But as things stand, we are quorum. And thanks again, Cliff. So if we could report from the Treasurer now, Robin.
Thank you, Sir Sandy. Can everyone hear me?
We're not going to take a vote in that, Robin, so just assume yes.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Fine, thanks again, and good evening, everyone. A summary of our annual accounts to 30th of September 19 along with my commentary, are included in our annual review, which you'll have received. More detailed financial statements are available on request. They've been approved by your council and provided to Oscar, the Scottish charity. We ask you to submit any questions regarding the accounts prior to this meeting, and as none have been received, let me briefly summarize my commentary. As mentioned,
Robin, would you like the slides up now?
Yes, please, Terry. Yeah, if that's.
Here we go.
That's the, I think that's the second one, Terry. If we could have the first
Yeah,
one.
it is. It's just dancing about here with the technology at the moment. Which is just being a little bit slow and cumbersome. My apologies. There.
Okay, right. Thanks, Terry. Apologies for that, folks. As I've said, the accounts have been, or a summary of the accounts has been circulated, and we ask for you to submit any questions regarding them prior to this meeting, and as none have been received, as I said a minute ago, let me briefly summarize my commentary. As mentioned, the deficit for the year was £1,464, down from £3,007 last year. Funds carried forward were £663,640, marginally down again from the year ending 17/18. Those numbers leave us in a reasonably strong position to face the challenges of the virus. But before bringing you up to date on where we envisage this current new year ending, I want first of all to thank the estate of Miss Margaret Fraser Woodburn for a very generous legacy of over £34,000, which helped enormously with last year's numbers. Over the years, legacies have been extremely important to us, and I would ask you all to remember us in your wills, if at all possible. I also want to thank Aberdeen Standard for their sponsorship and donations of their sponsorship of last year's Doors Open Day, and also for printing our brochure free of charge. Unfortunately, they are unable to continue their support this year, a sign of the times, perhaps. Have we flipped on to the next chart, Terry, or?
Yes, we're on the second page.
Oh, this is quite new to us and quite interesting.
The second page is up, Robin.
Yeah, we should still have the, I just need the first page for another.
Okay, right. If you want to go back, that's fine.
Okay, as I said, I also want to thank Aberdeen Standard for the sponsorship of last year's Doors Open Day, and also for printing our brochure free of charge. Unfortunately, they are unable to continue their support this year, a sign of the times, perhaps. I also want to thank our members for your subscription and donations. I'm pleased to report, and as mentioned by Terry, that notwithstanding an increase in the cost of the annual subscription, which we announced at the AGM last year, our membership is increasing for the first time in some time. Since last August, we have 97 more annual members, an increase of 22%. We are also in the process of reviewing our list of life members, which is substantially out of date and which again Cliff mentioned, and we will be putting in place a program specifically aimed at those who took out life membership a number of years ago. Without all your support, we couldn't function, And before moving on to this current year, lastly, on a personal note, I would like to thank Terry and his team for the outstanding work that they do in managing our financial circumstances. Now on to this year. So if we could have that second slide, please, Terry. I needn't tell you of the difficulties we're facing. Nevertheless, the world has not come to a stop. Many of the issues we campaign on remain, and if anything, are becoming more important. At the beginning of lockdown, and again as mentioned by Cliff, your council decided that it was important to keep our organisation functioning as effectively as possible. And to this end, we would not take advantage of the government's furlough scheme. Rather, the team would stay as is, working from home, which they have been doing very successfully. However, this of course has financial implications, as has our decision not to run Doors Open Day in its normal format. Although an exciting alternative is in development, we have concluded that sponsors will be thin on the ground. Given these decisions, and as I mentioned in my report, this all means it's likely that we'll face a substantially increased deficit this year, one in the region of £50,000, plus any change in the value of our investments. As I mentioned earlier, a relatively strong financial position allows us to cope with this, albeit with a substantial reduction in the value of our funds carried forward. Luckily, we have a strengthened team in place, allowing more resources to be allocated to fundraising, and an exciting plan is in development. However, the nature of this type of activity is that results don't come immediately, and that therefore our reserves are likely to reduce for a further year before we start to see a recovery. Nevertheless, I'm sure one will come, allowing the Cockburn Association to continue its important contribution to protecting and enhancing the amenities of our precious city. May I again thank you for all your support. It's very much appreciated. Thank you.
Robin, thank you very much once again for your efforts and success through the year in the role of treasurer. One of the things we would normally do at this point in time is seek your authority to reappoint the independent examiner, who's in effect the auditor. So, Terry, if you have a voting option available to us, there we go. That's the minutes. Second, oh, there we are. So on number 2, we're very grateful if you would vote regarding the appointment of Sheen and Tate as independent examiners of the association. Terry, my submit button isn't working. I wondered if I need to answer question 1 again. Yes, I do. So for anyone out there who's finding that responding yes to question 2 doesn't work on its own, please respond to question 1 as well. And Terry, you may wish to check the technology.
Yes, well, it's coming through. I think if you click on either one, it comes through.
You need to click on both, I think, Terry.
Yeah. I'm afraid the only control I have in front of me is end polling, which, as we're kind of coming up at the moment, is I think 75% of you have voted so far, which is looking stable. So if we call that to an end to the polling, and if I share the results, I think what we can see is there's again a unanimous support for the reappointment of Sheen and Tate.
Thanks, Terry. I see from the count of participants that we're now up to 80, so repeat what I said at the start, which is that we'll reserve questions and comments to be taken at the end. At the bottom of your screen, if you touch it, you'll find a chat capability. So if you wish to record a comment or a question, then please do so, and we'll try to deal with everything at the end. Next, though, on the agenda, we have a report from the Vice Chairman and Convener of the Policy and Development Committee, Andrew MacLeod.
Thank you, Sir Sandy. I think there are some slides, Terry, to come with this.
There are indeed.
Shall I just start while you, I'll make my preamble while you organise. I mean, it's my privilege, really, to serve as the convener of the Policy and Development Committee on behalf of you all. And what it has been, as you will know, and as from you will have gathered what's been said already, has been a very busy time for the Cockburn over the last the year that we're looking at, 2018, 19, and subsequently. There's a great deal going on in Edinburgh, a very high level of investment, high pace of development, and how far and to what extent that will continue into the future in the present uncertain situation, obviously we don't know, but that has raised a lot of questions and issues that over the last 18 months or so we have become involved. One of the things we've done is Cliff referred to the away days and the gatherings we've had of trustees. One of the changes we've made, in addition to changes in the office, is in the committee structure of the Cockburn, and to set up the Policy and Development Committee as hopefully a way of improving our advice on our ability to form policy and our advice on the development and kind of technical issues that come up, and to kind of advise the council in a fuller and more informed way on what's going on. And I mean, I think that committee has been running now. It started actually after the end of the year that we're looking at in this AGM, but it's been considering many of the same issues. And I think it's been running, I think, on a very healthy basis, and has had some very vigorous discussions. I'm very grateful to all the council members who've taken part. In terms of the issues we've been looking at, Cliff has already referred. I don't see anything yet on the screen, Terry.
Okay, I'm having a.
I'll carry on. Cliff has already referred to the issues, some of the issues in Princess Street Gardens and East Princess Street Gardens, which obviously the Christmas market, which has, and the planning application there, which raised massive controversy. And that's, I think, has been part of a wider issue round about open space, public space in the city, commodification of open space. And we now, I see, have in front of us some pictures. And I think here we have the images, we did have a moment ago, images on the commodification of open space. Can maybe go back to them. There we are. And I think these two images actually tell us a lot of the story, don't they? I mean, you see on the right-hand side, really, and you see also in some of the pictures in that annual report, really the kind of disaster of what has been going on in East Princess Street Gardens. We await the planning application and the chance to comment on future plans for the Christmas market in East Princess Street Gardens and what's going to happen there. And we will certainly be looking at that with a very, very critical eye. Although, again, what form or shape a Christmas market will be able to take in this year and the next year or two is clearly uncertain. But nevertheless, we'll want to look at all that very closely. On the left-hand picture, sorry, moved on rather quickly, but never mind. Left-hand picture showed the West Princes Street Gardens, the castle in the background, and some of the advertising hoardings for some of the events that go on. And again, I think we've been very concerned, really, particularly about the kind of large-scale events that happen, and the number of large-scale events that happen in West Princes Street Gardens. It's another example of the kind of maybe commercial and private interests intruding into really what is one of the most, I think most of us would regard as one of the beautiful public spaces, certainly in the UK and maybe in Europe more widely. And it's clear that there is concern among the citizens at some of what the council is doing to kind of promote these large-scale events. That's something we've voiced and will continue to voice, and also to kind of raise the whole issue, not just in the centre of the city, but across public spaces citywide. And I think one of the things we've seen just in the last few weeks, when we've all had to spend 8 weeks enforced at home, is just how important the public spaces around the city and the ability to get out and get into some open space and just experience the kind of green spaces and amenity that there are. It's just underlined, I think, how important that issue is. And of course, the public meeting that the Cockburn held at the beginning of this year on a Dreich January evening to discuss this issue attracted 700 people. Which I think probably beyond the wildest expectations that we had, and I think speaks really for itself as to the concerns that exist. Moving on to another of the high-profile issues we've been concerned with. The images again you see in front of you. This is the Summer Streets initiative. Which was organised by the council, put in place by the council during the festival to try and create more space for pedestrians, to create an environment for people to circulate in better. But I think you can see that the result didn't actually come out all that well. And I think our feeling on this was that this was closing a number of streets in the city centre, trying to create more pedestrian space, is something we very much support. But the way it was done and the way it was executed was again fairly disastrous. And I mean, in some of the streets, even some of the businesses were not told or given the details of what was going to happen, and it had a big impact on many businesses. And it wasn't really all that effective in controlling crowds. And I think the question it raises on tourism and tourist strategy more widely for Edinburgh is, I think as a group, as the Cockburn Association, I think we very much would like to see more measures taken and better measures taken to manage the tourism sector and the impact of tourists on our city. And we all know about the kind of pressure points and the kind of crowds that gather, particularly in July and August, along the streets, and the difficulty of moving around the city. And we certainly are very keen to see measures to manage that better. But I think questions in our mind really about the capacity of the city, and I think we do feel as an organisation that there needs to be a deeper look at the capacity of the city to absorb the number of visitors that we have had in recent years, and at ways of perhaps maybe developing the quality of the tourist experience rather than simply trying to maximise the volume of numbers. Moving on to the next set of issues. Are we moving on? Oh, there we go. There we go. Right, great. And we've also, there have been a number, you'll all be aware, a number of big kind of retail projects proposed and going on around the city, affecting some of the very iconic landmarks of Edinburgh. And you see on the left what used to be Binns, what is still, I think, certainly by most older people known as Binns Corner, We're now seeing that developed into the Johnny Walker experience. And I think when we met the developers, promoters and architects for that particular project, we actually took quite a positive view that actually this was a project that had the potential to bring life back. Fraser's having moved on, that it had the potential to bring life back to an important corner of the city. There's, again, as you will know, something similar going on at the other end of the street with the Jenner's building, when Jenner's move out in due course into the St. James Centre, and there's likely to be, there will be a redevelopment of that building, probably to provide retail space, a different type of retail space, cafes, restaurants, and maybe a hotel. We've had early meetings with the promoters behind that project, and again, I think our general approach and attitude to that has been to be, it's in very early days yet, but I think we've been quite encouraged by what we've heard. We're not highly keen on the idea of a hotel, but the kind of redevelopment of that building in a sympathetic way to provide a modern experience of retail, cafe and restaurants seems to us a good concept, and I think we certainly feel in these early days that it's moving towards something that potentially could be a benefit for the city. We've also looked as a group at plans to adjust the planning rules around about retailing along Printer Street and the side streets. We've expressed some concerns that clearly we're all aware of the situation in the retail industry, of the shift towards online retailing, the need to have more diverse users. And again, we support that. But we felt that what the council was proposing to go up to 50% non-retail in Printer Street and a third non-retail in the side streets was probably going too far. And that's something we'll certainly continue to watch. In terms of other projects that we've looked at over the last year, I've mentioned one or two where we've been broadly at this stage supportive of the development and the direction it was taking. There have obviously been other examples. I mean, there's a proposal for a very large development at Haymarket, in the old goods yard at Haymarket, where I think we felt that the plans and the quality of the architecture and the development were indifferent at best. And that the impact on the local community was something that we were not happy about. So we encouraged our members to object to that. There has been also involvement down in Stead's Place in Leith in objecting to joining in with the local community to raise concerns to object with that development, which were eventually upheld. The concerns and objections were eventually upheld by the Scottish Government reporter, but there are now new proposals there which we'll need to look at and see where those go. We've also been looking at the proposals at the bottom of Dundas Street for the site where the old RBS building was. And that is actively, we've had a number of meetings, that those are actively under discussion at the moment. Moving on to kind of policy issues, clearly we had the very successful event in seminar looking at short-term lets and the impact of Airbnb. That's an issue we've continued to pursue. There was a Scottish Government consultation last year on short-term lets, to which the Cockburn Association responded. And we are continuing to watch that very closely, and our stance is to press strongly for some form of regulation, some much stronger form of regulation, licensing and control of short-term lets, especially in the city centre, because I think the evidence on the effect that these short-term lets are having on the level of rents, the affordability of accommodation, and the kind of the impact it has on communities. I mean, the evidence is overwhelming, and I think one of the joys of Edinburgh really is that even now it remains a city that has many people living in the heart of the city in a way that is not all that common across the UK. And it's one of the great, I think, distinctive features of Edinburgh, both maybe not so much now in the old town, sadly, as it once was, but certainly still in the new town. And it's something that I think we very much do not want to lose. We also commented on the tourist tax. We supported the proposals of the Scottish Government for a tourist tax. And we feel that's something that could raise some money to deal with some of the consequences and help in the management of tourism, as I've referred to. Our particular focus was to say that we would be keen that the revenues from any such tax were ploughed back into supporting historic buildings and supporting the environment of the city, and didn't just kind of disappear into the general coffers of government in the way these things can sometimes happen. Moving on, those have been, I think, the kind of highlights of some of the issues that Cockburn was involved in during the year that we're looking at in this AGM 2018-19. Just looking forward to some of the beyond the end of the year, just to some of the issues that are on our plate and that we're concerned with just now. There is a city centre. The council have been developing and promoting a city centre transformation strategy, I mean, some people might say that Edinburgh has one of the finest, potentially one of the finest city centres in the world, and doesn't actually need transformation. But I think we would all agree that there are kind of aspects of the environment of the city centre, and particularly the sort of provision for pedestrians and cyclists, and the ease of moving around city centres and the city centre, and the need to kind of address some of the choke points and crowded areas. That there are very much issues that need to be thought about. So we have very much supported the idea that there needs to be a transformation and a stronger strategy and stronger approach in the city centre. We have had some questions. I think we have some questions just about whether the actual document that we have, both the city centre transformation strategy and the wider plans that the council have for mobility and transport across the city, seem to us to focus rather heavily on kind of infrastructure and engineering projects and kind of physical investment, and maybe not think enough about, for example, if we're going to have a shift towards more active travel, more walking, more cycling, a shift from cars to public transport. How do we achieve that? How do we get the kind of changes in behaviours that will be needed if that's going to be brought to fruition? So we've raised a range of questions of that kind in relation to the city centre. We also have a concern. One of the aspects of the city centre transformation strategy, as it's set out in the council document, is to try and reduce the kind of bus services that run across the city centre, and try and encourage people to have kind of shuttle buses within the city centre and other bus routes running around the edge. We have some reservations, quite strong reservations about that aspect. Going on to the future development of the city, many of you will be aware that there have been two very important documents published just in the early part of this year. The plan's initial version, the kind of main issues document for what's called City Plan 2030, which is a statutory document, is the next stage of local planning in the city, and associated with that, a city mobility plan. Cockburn has spent a long time and a lot of effort looking at both of these documents. And I think what I would say about these documents, I would rather just echo actually what I said about the city centre transformation strategy, that we think there's actually a lot in these documents to be welcomed, and that a lot of the aims, aspirations and objectives of the council in the way these documents are put forward, we would very strongly support. But the same sorts of questions we have, I think, just as to delivery and execution, and whether the policy aspirations that exist in some of these documents can really be delivered, or will be sufficiently delivered. But the city plan particularly has some provisions in it. It talks about green open space, it talks about place plans, it talks about the importance of open space in new development. It talks about some restrictions, some tighter conditions on student housing, where student housing should be, the kind of student housing we should have. It talks about encouraging development within the city and on the brownfield rather than greenfield development, and trying to reduce the need to give up green space around the edge of the city for development. All of these things, I think, we find encouraging. So I think we see a lot in these documents to support, but equally very important, I think, just for us as a civic and amenity group in Edinburgh, to make sure that our views and the views of the citizens about priorities are heard. So those are the key issues, I think, that we have spent the last year and the year in question. These are the key issues we have spent our time looking at and thinking about on your behalf, I hope effectively, and we will continue to pursue these issues vigorously and energetically. And obviously, in a situation which we knew for all of us, and none of us knows exactly what the future for development in Edinburgh is going to hold. But I'm sure many of these issues will continue to be relevant, and we will do our very best to put in informed comments and to engage with public opinion and engage with citizens around about all of these very vital questions. So thank you.
And Andrew, thank you for the enormous efforts that you've put in alongside others who work with you in policy and development. We all owe you a grateful thanks. Thank you very much. I think we've reached a point in the agenda now where we can take questions or comments.
And Sir Sandy, if I could remind participants, it would help us if they use the chat function as part of Zoom to kind of type in kind of any questions. It'll help us just manage the kind of flow going forward. So I know that my kind of colleagues, Lucy, James and DJ, have been hopefully collating these kind of issues, but we did have one pre-submitted set of questions, which I think perhaps I could kind of pass over to you, Sir Sandy. One was answered with the Princes Street panel questions, or the Princes Street changes in policy, but there was a question asked about the Cockburn's position of trees on George Street.
Well, I'm not best placed to answer that one, but is that a question for Andrew perhaps, or Cliff?
I'm happy to give an answer to that question if that would be helpful. I mean, I think in terms of trees on George Street, the essential point is that what we felt was that having trees in the street would not really necessarily be in keeping with the kind of neoclassical and architectural concept of the street. But also I think there were questions, technically questions, about the sorts of trees you could have and whether actually it would be possible to have trees that really did enhance the streetscape, that just the kind of limitations of the kind of architecture and basements and so on would make trees difficult, and we were concerned about that.
Terry, were there any other pre-submitted questions?
Those were the only pre-submitted kind of questions. So
that was one question, was it?
And the other one related to the changes in non-retail provision on Princess Street and the adjacent side streets, which Andrew covered in his presentation.
Okay, thank you very much.
And
I'm not seeing any extra chat accumulating.
I guess what we can do is, if people have questions, as I said, is if you use the chat function below and kind of email them kind of in, that would be quite useful.
We have a question from Moira Tasker there. She's asking what are the Cockburn's responses to the expansion of house building and greenbelt land settlements to the west of Edinburgh, for example, Camel Fields or Winchborough?
Okay,
well, if in the void of silence, perhaps, President, if I could leap in to say that, is the Cockburn has been a steadfast supporter of green belts overall, and those two applications that were highlighted, we certainly object to, as I understand it, during the running of the planning process. At the time, these things can take some time to find themselves going through. In one instance, there was certainly a refusal but approval on appeal, and in other circumstances I certainly am aware that whilst the planners have recommended refusal, there have been, the planning committee in the past has actually approved consent. So we continue to monitor the applications and policy changes in kind of West Edinburgh, is certainly part of the City Plan 2030, and have highlighted our continuing concerns about that quantitative expansion on the edge of the city.
We also have a question from Moira asking what sort of future do we see for retail, cafes, restaurants and cultural venues, and what are the pros and cons and opportunities or threats for physical buildings? Anyone?
Well, I think if I could say on the future of different sectors of activity in around about the city centre, in Princess Street, George Street, the new St James Centre. I mean, I guess we're, as a result of the present situation, facing new uncertainties. It's probably too early to comment on that, but I guess the kind of, in the discussions we've had, the stance we would have taken up until now is that there clearly has been an expectation that the amount of physical retail space in the city centre is likely to decline, and the type of retailing is likely to change, and that, you know, as in cities across the world, that there will be more space is likely to be devoted to the experience, as it were, sort of things like kind of cafes, eating out, and the kind of cafe culture, so to speak, and that is likely to be a factor in Edinburgh as elsewhere, and that while we would want to, I think our stance would be that we want to safeguard some of the existing character of the city, that there's a kind of a trend towards change there that obviously we can't stand in the way of. The question is, you know, what type of change should we have, and what pace of change is acceptable, and what planning rules should be should be put in around it. But it does seem like that is the direction of travel, and what's happened in the last few weeks, I suspect, can only accelerate that.
It's difficult to tell precisely what's going to happen after things move on from the current lockdown. But my understanding of the national statistic is that 7 million people have been in receipt of furlough payments. And it may be that many of those people will not have a job to go back to when this crisis starts to lift. Millions of people are working from home. It may be that many employers will take the view that that's effective and that there will be no need to bring people or so many people into central offices. I've seen the statistic that globally sales of apparel clothing have fallen by in excess of 50%. And apart from the occasional person who dresses up to have dinner on a Saturday night with their partner or on a Zoom link with friends, not so many people are buying clothing, and we may find that retail sales of clothing don't recover. So I don't think we can presume too much exactly what the position will be when the position on lockdown changes, just how fast or indeed whether things will return to what we've seen in the past. So it's not at all clear to me that a lot of these retail premises will be needed simply because there won't be the footfall.
Adrian Laird Craig asks what would be the Cockburn's hunch on the issues relating to Princes Street at Christmas.
Should I check that? It's only a hunch. I can pitch anything. I think we simply don't know. But at one level, it's not our problem. You know, we're very much third parties in this. It seems clear that it's going to be extremely problematic, I would have thought. So much depends upon what happens with the virus and where we are, not just at Christmas, but in the run into that. If you remember, the development work last year started in mid-October. And so, yeah, it's very difficult to see how the social distancing type of rule could be compatible with a repeat of what happened this year. As far as we know, Underbelly are committed to putting in a planning application. They completed the period of pre-application notice. We've pointed previously to a set of planning policies in the existing local development plan, which seem to rule out the kind of development that took place. But we just have to see. It's very difficult, I say, to really guess at this stage. But the main thing is that we're ready to respond as soon as something comes in.
Simon Hollidge asks about lime trees and their use on George Street, particularly given that they can be shaped and pruned to a given height.
I see also a comment that lime trees might leave a sticky mess on the ground. So if anyone's able to deal with both of those, would be grateful.
I mean, shall I just say, I mean, I'm not sure, Chair, that I can add very much to what I already said about George Street, but certainly our feeling was, in terms of the discussion that took place, that it would be really almost only ornamental trees because of the physical restrictions that you could have in George Street, and that those would not have significant benefit. Whether lime trees, I mean, clearly in terms of the architecture and the kind of your view, your kind of aesthetic view, as it were, as to whether trees go with the neoclassical architecture in George Street, leaving that aside, whether lime trees are a feasible and practical possibility, I wouldn't know. That would be something that would have to be looked into.
Some of you may know that I spent a lot of my career, all my career in fact, standard life, and most of it in George Street building on the corner of George Street and St Andrew Square. And I know from my time there that the basements of the office went under the pavement. And in fact, there were tunnels or further basements under the road itself and have to put it right across the street. So I would have doubts that George Street could sustain trees rooted in the ground. It may be possible, of course, to put them, Andrew has said, ornamental trees, but they'd have to be in tubs sitting above the ground. I make no comment on the architectural benefits of that or otherwise.
Peter Ranson asks if he would, or it's more of a comment that he would hope to see that the Cockburn is going to be proactive in offering solutions as well as criticisms of the CAC as it attempts to raise revenue. He suggests that we perhaps consider adopting the approach in Amsterdam based on Kate Raworth's donut model of guiding cities to thrive in balance with the planet. Does anyone?
Sorry, I comment on that. I mean, I think I hopefully made clear in my remarks that, you know, that there are a lot of areas and issues where we've raised concerns with the City of Edinburgh. Equally, there are a lot of the thinking behind of the strategies and the aspirations and the direction in which the city would like to move that I think actually is quite close to our own thinking. So we're very much not just about being critical and kind of raising questions about things the whole time. If there are things we support and directions we think are the right directions, then we will always say that, and we would always. I think as an association, I think we've always, you know, there have always been developments we've had concerns about in Edinburgh. Equally, I think we very much accept that cities have to develop and grow, and that we have to find you know, positive ways to do that kind of are in keeping with our communities and in keeping with the way citizens want to live their lives. And I think that's the perspective that we will always start from.
Could I maybe just add that to Peter's question? I think if you're able to stay for the presentation on our unique city that follows, I think you'll see that we are being proactive, that we are trying to put out an agenda that is not directly drawn from Raworth's donut model, not explicitly, but I think reflects a lot of those underlying principles.
We've got a couple of questions about cafe culture from Mike Wilson and from Deirdre Henderson. Mike says, do we have a position on the tension between spaces for people and cafe culture, particularly given that's what the industry is pushing for, notably in relation to areas with limited space, such as the Old Town? And then Deirdre is on a similar theme. Is Scotland warm enough for such an outside cafe culture? And is there space for buggies, disabled people and other users?
Sorry.
Well, if perhaps we haven't really formed a full position on it because it's an emerging kind of trend, but something we've discussed kind of a lot amongst the staff. Certainly in terms of dealing with the social distancing challenges, which strikes us as all we're doing is moving the problem from an indoor to an outdoor one, and that hasn't been fully resolved. There's also an equal concern that we are just, in a sense, formalizing some of the commodification challenges that we've seen kind of already, where we're taking public space, in effect streets, footpaths, parks, etc., and handing them over to kind of private enterprise for managing. So there is opportunity to manage it, but it's really kind of how and to what degree. And I know in terms of the question, does Edinburgh have the climate for it? Well, Jan Gale certainly talks about the Danish experience, whose climate can be a little bit more extreme, and you can actually have a compatible cafe culture. It just depends on how you manage it, I think.
There are lots of comments in responses to the question. I won't read all of those out. There's another question here from Malcolm Daw. It's just a new question. He's asking, are we planning to put out some blogs as knowledge develops from the city experts on possible new strategies in relation to these large changes that are upon us?
again, should I answer?
Could I say something before I hand to you? Excuse me. One of the things I think is really important, and it's not just business of the Cockburn, but on a national level, that I think we sit back and think hard about what's happened and whether there should be changes of direction. For example, on immigration, the current direction is to make it difficult, if not impossible, for low-skilled people to come to this country, and yet the Prime Minister acknowledged, coming out of intensive care, that he had been served by people from all sorts of nations around the world, who'd been looked after. So many roles in the National Health Service would be deemed to be low-skilled. Fruit and veg is picked by people whose jobs would be deemed to be low-skilled, and we simply can't function as a country unless we think again about who encouraged to come here to do that type of work. Many people will be re-evaluating whether they want to get back on public transport to the same extent. Those of us who visit London from time to time find that the conditions prior to this could be really, very unpleasant. And I think given what's happening, I think many people will reappraise their lives. So I hope that we would respond to these conditions and be incredibly thoughtful about how we go forward from here. I was in a different environment the other day, thinking about the poem The Road Not Travelled by Frost, and in it the traveller eventually makes a choice between two paths which are conceded are both well trodden, although one less travelled by than the other. And I think as we come out of this crisis, we should be thinking very hard about which path we take, and indeed be seriously considering taking paths that have not been trodden before, new ways. We should be seeking to find new ways. And I think it's a wonderful time for the Cockburn Association to be thoughtful and thought-provoking about how the city should come out of this crisis and how people in the city should go about their lives and earn their livelihoods. So, sorry, Cliff.
No, that's a very thoughtful intervention. And I think that was very much the reasoning why we decided not to go down the furlough route, why we felt that, in fact, this very fundamental change that we've all suddenly experienced made it even more important that we sat down and thought and put our messages out. And, that's basically what we're planning. I don't know whether, I know DJ is already covering all the questions that are coming in, but I don't know whether he wants to say anything about some of the ideas that we've had.
Some of the ideas relating to
well, perhaps Cliff, if I can get capturing kind of DJ is on the back of it, is we've begun kind of a series of Cockburn Conversations, which is a video blog program, if nothing else. We're doing, I think, just what Sir Sandy has questioned, beginning to have conversations about what a new normal is, what's a new direction going forward, challenging perhaps some of the assumptions that we have been running to hitherto before the COVID kind of crisis. Perhaps asking some of the more awkward questions that haven't been, because we will be heading down kind of a route where it is kind of uncharted. Going back to January or December or November, and the assumptions that we have perhaps aren't those realities that we need to manage going forward. So what we've been doing is working on developing this whole program of engagement. And I think it's really a case of just keeping an eye on our social media feeds and our websites. And indeed, we've even set up a YouTube channel for capturing kind of all of this. But it is a very, very good point, is we don't know where some of the kind of issues are kind of taking us. And even some of the very basic economic assumptions in behind us will be challenged.
Thank you.
And just while I'm here as well, conscious of kind of time and questions kind of flowing in, is one of the benefits that Zoom allows us to do is to collect all of the chats and the questions that you do kind of ask. So whilst we're recording this so it can be shared with others, is what we'll also do is be collating the kind of questions and the issues raised, and kind of post AGM is we will be folding either those into the Our Unique City kind of program, or we can respond separately to people with the questions they kind of raise.
I see lots of comments about the, in response to many of the questions. I don't see any new questions, but I do see a request from Moira Forrest that if the meeting goes on after 8 p.m, could we have a 5-minute pause in order for everyone to go out and show their appreciation for the NHS workers and care sector.
Yeah, I think we should aim to finish the AGM before 8 o'clock and deal with outstanding matters by wide circulation by email.
I'm not seeing any new questions in that case.
Well,
just comments.
There's a question about the film house on Festival Square from Rosanna.
Yeah. Are there views on the suitability of the plans to rebuild the film house on Festival Square?
Come on.
Well, if I can perhaps kind of leap in the kind of void to capture that, we've had a number of discussion sessions with the film house, including a Zoom presentation with them and their kind of architects, Richard Murphy Architects. The kind of emerging position of the Cockburn, accepting we're still in a very dynamic consultative phase, is that the case for using Festival Square, however unsuccessful it currently is as a public space, has not been made to our satisfaction yet. So we would require much more justification before it's deemed to be a suitable development site. And even if it is, in terms of the form and disposition of the kind of building, there were a number of serious questions that we were kind of asking in terms of the scale of kind of uses, the amount of food and drink and hospitality, which is unusual, I guess, but also the verticality of the kind of building, given how much space is given over to circulation, just how functionable the building would be going into the kind of future. And there are additional questions about height, scale, mass, materiality, all of which we're putting to them to consider as part of their pre-planning application consultation. So we recognize that the film house is a well-loved and important cultural asset in the city. And I think conceptually what we want to do is help them as much as we can. But we still haven't been sold on their proposals that they put forward yet.
Good.
I see Moira Tasker has noted the pressure on charities generally and all that's going on, scale of proposals, asking what can us members do to support the Cockburn in your work. And then Ian Percival supports Moira's question and states that as a newcomer to Edinburgh, the association would wish to be actively involved in addition to merely paying subscriptions. So, Cliff or Terry, can you respond to Moira and Ian? What more can people do to help?
Well, I'll hand over. Perhaps the chairman may wish to kind of add into it as well. Clearly, the pressure on charities across the UK is hugely significant, as Moira will well know. And in fact, I was in a meeting this morning within the kind of wider Scottish kind of architectural planning and heritage sector, where there is a huge amount of uncertainty about many organisations being able to survive over the next 6 months. And even larger organisations like the National Trust for Scotland are in deep crisis mode. So what you can do to kind of help the Cockburn is we are a membership body, Membership is important to us. So, for those who are members, fantastic, please stick with us. Try to encourage friends and family to kind of join. That would be enormously beneficial. We've recently kind of opened up a number of charitable giving kind of accounts, for example, with Amazon Smile. So as we're all locked up in our homes shopping on Amazon, please go through the Amazon Smile channel and we'll get a donation for every purchase you make. These are some little things that we can do. We're always looking for people who have an interest and skills to contribute to our kind of wider work. One of the important roles that the Policy and Development Committee plays is as a conduit for taking the skills and kind of interest and helping channel it into kind of useful activities for us. So for those who would like to contribute, I think the easiest thing to do would be to send me an email with some of your thoughts and things that you think you can contribute, and we'll take that conversation forward.
Yeah, just echo what Terry said. When people volunteered help in the past, very often I've actually had a meeting with them and chat about what what their particular strengths are that they can offer. So I think, yes, send something to Terry. The other thing that does just strike me is we still know that quite a significant number of our members still are not on the internet, and that's obviously fair enough, but it means that they are probably increasingly going to miss out on things over this lockdown period. So if you've got any friends who are members, but not even, not on this meeting tonight or anything else, maybe you can just phone them and chat to them as well and provide a bit of support all around and keep people informed.
Lady View asks, I think in reference to the film house, why not rebuild where it is at the moment?
I think my understanding is there are some quite difficult technical problems around that the site is so constrained, and there's aspects of it are listed. I think it's probably not an option for them.
And Rosanna adds that we should consider give as you live or just giving the better choices for Amazon. Well, actually, I can probably answer that. We're looking at exactly those, and we'll be rolling those out in the coming weeks so that members can have other opportunities to give as they purchase and buy things.
DJ, did we cover Deirdre Henderson's question on
roll back up?
enough support from the public demonstrated for making huge transformation changes?
I may have missed that one, I'm afraid.
The changes for residents or tourists?
I think that probably comes into either be you or to kind of Andrew to come. I think it's a very good point. There has been a ongoing and increasing tension over the years in between development plans which feel as if they're more targeted to visitors to the city than people who live and work in it, and that has been increasingly recognized as a major pressure point kind of the city, which clearly COVID has had a major kind of impact on going forward, and it isn't entirely helped by some of the decisions from the kind of executive, the council, to, for example, continue with dialogues with the tourist sector, but to not have parallel conversations with the civic sector, which we continue to push for. Aspects of our unique city, I think, really help that, and you'll see that kind of presentation kind of later on. But the key message that we would always say within this is, if you do have concerns about issues, about policies, about proposals you're seeing kind of emanating in the city, certainly bring them to kind of our attention so that we know the scale of the kind of issue, but also bring them to the attention of your local elected councillor. Because sometimes if we're not communicating with them directly, they don't know the full scale of public concern.
Terry, thank you very much. I'm very anxious that we don't hold anyone back from going outside for 8 o'clock. I think more or less we've covered all of the points. Jerry Wozniak, and forgive me, Jerry, if I haven't said that correctly, said he hopes that offline response to questions posed here will be addressed to everybody. If we haven't fully addressed them, and I would say yes, the staff will, I'm sure, go through this full list. It's well documented, and check what's been properly answered, and perhaps provide supplementary information if that seems appropriate and necessary. But it will go by general broadcast. I'm sure it's easier to do that than to respond individually. I'd like to thank Simon Hollidge for his positive comment about our use of Zoom. Thank you, Simon. And I would like to thank all of you for your excellent discipline on this call. We've had very large numbers of people participating. You've all been incredibly well behaved. Relative to other Zoom calls I've had with large numbers, I commend you. And I commend you also for your participation via the chat function here. Again, I've been on so many Zoom calls with people maintaining a great silence. Jerry, thank you for confirming that my pronunciation was close enough. You'll maybe give it one day. But to all of you, I thank you again for your participation. I thank everyone who contributes so wholeheartedly to the work of the Cockburn, and to every member for your subscriptions and other ways in which you contribute. At this point, I think we should end the call with enough time to work out how to do that and still get your coats on and get yourselves outside.
Yes.
Good evening. Cliff, you better, or Terry, you better tell us what's going to happen with the presentation.
Well, first of all, we've been recording this kind of AGM, so over the next few days we will post it up so that other members can see it as well. What we will do, I think, following kind of Moira's request, is we will have a break and reconvene at, if I could suggest, 8:05, so give you a chance for a clap and a comfort break. And for those who wish to come back and kind of join us, we will play a pre-recorded kind of PowerPoint presentation from Professor Cliff Haig on our unique city post-COVID. What are the issues kind of facing us? For those of you who won't be rejoining us for that, we will also be publishing that on our website and YouTube channel, so you can catch up with it in due course. So what we'll do is I guess formally kind of end the AGM. I'll hand back to the president to do so, and we'll reconvene for the presentation video at 8:05 for those who wish to join us.
There is no more. Thanks, Terry. There is no more to do but say thank you to everyone. The meeting is now formally closed. Thank you.